I asked you guys on Snapchat and Twitter to submit some questions about street performing. I'm going to answer those today, along with a few of the questions that you guys have been asking me over the course of the previous weeks. Let's get into it with Snapchat.
What are the hardest performances to do and what are the easiest ones to do?
The hardest street shows, without a doubt, are the ones when I perform in really hot temperatures. During the summer, I did a show in 32 degrees Celsius heat, and I was dying. I then did another show straight after that, and during that show, I genuinely thought I was going to pass out. Towards the last trick, I was just a little bit like, whoa, I am losing the ability to stay conscious right now. And when it's that hot, the audience has a really short attention span, and they don't want to watch a show, so just trying to keep them engaged and trying to keep yourself awake and alive is a big challenge. The easiest street shows are on a Saturday in the evening, during the holidays when it's not too hot. Normally, when I say hello and the audience responds, if they respond positively and they're really energetic, I know that we're going to have a good show.
How do you judge whether the crowd will find your jokes funny or not?
This is an interesting one because I don't consider myself particularly funny. When I do try a joke in the show, if the audience laughs, that's obviously a good thing. If they don't, then I keep the joke in the show for like a few more shows, sometimes 10, 20, 30 more shows, but I'll change the wording a little bit every time, hoping that at some point the audience will laugh. Sometimes it's just a case of getting the right wording and then the joke will be funny. If I think something's funny, I'll persist with it for a while, but at the end of the day, if the audience doesn't respond, I just take it out of the show. But the whole approach to street shows is just trial and error, trial and error, trial and error.
Hey Steven, so how does making magic for street performing differ from making it for just a video or performing it for one person? Does it change at all?
This is a really great question. To me, performing on the streets is very different to performing on video. When I'm planning magic for a street show, I've got to think about how the whole act flows. And you don't want to be doing a series of tricks, you want to be doing a routine and an act that somehow flows. So it's about getting those tricks that flow together so you can keep people's attention all the way throughout. The main thing for me on the street is finding magic that I like, that the audience likes, and that the audience will be able to see. There's no point me doing a little coin trick on the street. No one's going to be able to see that. I want to do stuff that plays big. Whereas on YouTube, I've got a lot more flexibility in that regard because I can do little tricks and the camera can come in and you can get a good view of those tricks.
Are you an actual magician? Because your tricks are really impressive.
If I answered that question, I might get in trouble with the other wizards. Now moving on to Twitter. Do you need a license? And if so, how do you go about applying for one? This totally depends on the country that you're in and the city that you're in. In the UK, we have a law. Basically, you're allowed to make reasonable use of a public space. So you can kind of perform anywhere without having to get a license. However, then there are certain places that are private property. And I think in some circumstances you can perform there without a license, but in other circumstances you need a license. So it all gets a bit messy. I don't have a license to perform anywhere. I tend to just stick to the spots where you can perform. What's the strangest thing to ever happen during one of your street shows? The strangest thing that has ever happened to me street performing was early on when I started doing shows, probably my first or second week. I was doing fork bending in my act. So I was just being all magician-y, bending some forks, you know how it is. If you saw my last video, you'll know at the beginning of my show, I give out a few forks to audience members to help me build a crowd and get people involved. So during the show, one man at the front of the audience, standing in the center, holding a fork, takes a dramatic step forward, like some kind of bad supervillain, and holds up the fork like this. He then proceeds with this really frowny face to bend the fork via magic. So this guy is clearly a magician, but I think the worst thing you can ever do as a magician is to just jump in during the middle of someone else's show and start performing magic. I have no idea what this guy was thinking. I politely asked him to stop, but he just kept doing it. He just really wanted the attention, and the rest of the audience were just looking at him like, what is this guy doing? It was so awkward. And at the end of the show, he just came up to me and started having a chat. And I was like, what are you doing? You just ruined my show. What are you doing? Essentially, he tried to have a wizard's duel during a show. Madness. Is it ever awkward/uncomfortable asking for audience participation? I never really feel awkward asking audience members to come up on stage, but there's always this moment where if they say no, it puts me in a really bad spot. I never like to embarrass anybody, so when I ask them if they'll come up on stage, I tend to do it in quite a, oh, come up on stage, you'll have a great time kind of attitude. But sometimes people are just really nervous and they don't want to come on stage. Now, I've found this happen so much, if that person refuses, the next person I ask will also refuse, the next person will refuse, and I lose all control over the show. So now my approach tends to be, I ask an audience member what their name is, they say their name, and I say, everybody give it a huge hand while Sarah comes up on stage, and I get the audience to clap. If they're a little bit hesitant, I tend to say, don't worry, I'm not going to embarrass you, you're going to have a really good time. And then that usually means that they'll come up on stage. If they don't, I'm in a very tricky spot, because no one else is going to come on stage. Have you ever been heckled? If so, what did they say/do? Yes, I have. I, to be quite honest, am not witty enough to put down a heckler very efficiently. The worst kind of heckler for me are the people that are being overly enthusiastic to the point of sarcasm. It's always really hard to deal with someone that's cheering enthusiastically in a sarcastic manner. It's very difficult to sort of ask them to stop because they're being enthusiastic, but they know they're being sarcastic and you do and the audience does, and it sort of makes it a weird vibe. The worst heckle I've ever had was when people came on stage, they just started dancing, trying to mess up the show, then they would leave, then they would come back on stage and dance a bit and try and mess things up and pick up my stuff and move it around. The problem was, when I made a joke at their expense, they then left the stage and one of them came round, ran and grabbed my mic off me and ran away. And then one of my other street performer friends had to run over, and then the police got involved, and then it all got a bit complicated. But I did manage to finish the show. Have you ever received negative feedback from an audience at one of your performances? I think one time someone came up to me and they were annoyed about the joke when I say, "If you've just got here, we're collecting money for charity," because they didn't realize that I was kidding. Other than that, I haven't really had much negative feedback. The negative feedback that you get is when people just walk away from the show. And the worst moment like that was when I did a show, held up my hat, and then the whole audience walked away. That was painful. Has someone ever given you food or sweets instead of money, and how do you feel about it? Lol. People put sweets in my hat every now and again, and it sort of depends what kind of place it comes from. I don't really ever take it negatively, but if someone comes up to me and they give me a sandwich because they think I'm really poor and I'm really struggling and I'm homeless, I sometimes am a bit like, oh, no, I'm just a performer. Some people tend to perceive street performers as being people that are struggling in life. I had a subscriber come up to me and give me a burger once. That was very nice. One time, a guy came up to me at the end of my show and he said he didn't have any money, but he was going to go get ice cream and asked if I wanted one. And I was like, yeah, totally. And he came back during the next show and brought me like a massive Ben & Jerry's awesome ice cream, which I appreciated. I love a good ice cream. Do you get anxiety/nervous with bad crowds now or when you were just starting out? Sometimes when I build an audience and I say that first initial hello and I get nothing back, I know it's going to be a tough show. And in my head, I'm just a bit like, oh, this will be a challenge. But I never really get nervous or anxious about it. I just get on with the show. Some crowds are good, some crowds are bad. What do you enjoy the most about performing? When the audience is having a really good time and enjoying the show, I'm having a good time. That is it. How do you fake confidence, and how has pretending to not be nervous helped you in other parts of your life? This is the kind of question that I can make a whole video on in itself, but in terms of street performance, I know that the audience want to watch someone that is confident and in control. So I try my best to be confident because I know that's going to be the best for the show. Even if I'm not feeling confident, I just act confident because I know that will produce a better show. What's one piece of advice you would give to Stephen who was about to do his first street show? This isn't what I say to myself just about to do my first street show, but it is what I find myself saying to myself all the time, and that's that I wish I'd started sooner. With a lot of areas of my life, I often find myself thinking, this is great, but I wish I'd started sooner. So the only advice I'd really give to my past self is just to start sooner. And if you want to do something, just give it a go. But in terms of specifically on my first street show, the only thing I'd really want to say is just get better equipment, because my equipment went through a lot of different technical problems. But apart from that, all the challenges that I faced really helped me develop as a performer, so I wouldn't really want to change any of that. Do you really collect enough money to pay bills with just street magic, or do you have another job to help? Street performing is my primary way of making a living. It totally is doable. It does take a lot of work. You do have to be able to deal with a lot of uncertainty. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. The amount of money that you earn ranges massively, but yeah, that's how I pay my rent. I do also make some money from YouTube, but that money tends to go back into my YouTube channel. I get some money from the Patreon supporters, and I just want to say thank you so much. If you support me on Patreon, you massively help me out. And then I also do the odd paid magic gig, and those are all the ways I make a living. Such an interesting insight into street magic. Thank you. When it comes to schedule and everything, is there one boss or person who keeps an eye on everything, or does the responsibility lie with every performer to keep the peace and make sure everything runs smoothly? The responsibility lies with every performer. We don't have a boss. There's an independent organization called Busk in London that try and keep everything smooth between the buskers and the council, but they don't really have an authority over us. They just try and keep everything running smoothly. It is the street performers that keep the system running, and it is the street performers that police other street performers. Disappointed there wasn't that much of a crowd when I saw you. That card in the lemon trick was top notch. Do you do better/harder performances for bigger crowds, or just choose randomly? No, I always give every performance my absolute best. Sometimes the crowd isn't very good. Sometimes I'm not very good, even though I'm trying. Sometimes I'm tired. Sometimes I'm just not quite on top form, but I always give it my best. And then, as I say, shows, they vary so much. Sometimes they're great and on top of the world. Other times, I kind of suck. How do you go about asking people to give you money? I imagine it'd be difficult/awkward. The way that I do it is that I'm doing my show, and then just before the finale, once I've been building up the finale, I stop and I introduce myself and I let people know that no one pays me to be here, and that the only way I can do this as a job is if people support me by putting money in the hat. I don't tell people how much to give, but I do make some suggestions. I say things like, in London, a beer costs you about £5, a coffee's £2 or £3. I think this show is worth at least a cup of coffee. But I never tell people that they have to give me money, and I never tell them that they have to give me a specific amount. I just let them know this is how I make a living, and if they want to support that, they can. The queue system helps regulate the quantity of acts. What are the factors that determine the quality of acts? That's a really interesting question. I guess if you're not good, you're not going to make any money. So naturally, it's not going to be a viable career option for you. So people will try, they won't do very well, and then they'll just stop performing because they can't make a living at it. So I guess the quality of the act is determined by the audience members deciding whether or not to pay at the end of the show. Isn't there a risk of your equipment getting stolen when you leave it in that spot whilst queuing? Yeah, but it really never happens. There's usually at least one performer just hanging around that spot, so they keep an eye on things. Also, Leicester Square is just a really well policed area, so I think that deters criminals from trying to steal things as much. Do you perform the same tricks every day, every hour, etc., or are there sets that you rotate through? I keep the same show, which I tweak every now and again and change things, but largely I want to get one show that's really good, because you're getting a new audience every time. rotating different shows doesn't really benefit you. It's better to have one show mastered than keep switching every show. I'll be doing another Q&A video in a month or two. If you want to submit questions, follow me on Snapchat, Stephen Bridges TV, and Twitter, @StephenBridges, and I will ask you there for more questions. Please like this video if you liked it. There won't be a video next week because I'm going off on holiday for a little bit, but then there'll be lots of magic videos to come because as soon as I get back, we are on it and we are filming lots of magic. That's everything. I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. Thank you!